Our job begins where most advisors stop. Saving money is great, but how do you spend it without risk in retirement? Welcome to Every Day is Saturday with Brad Gatto and Matt Stahl, partners and private wealth managers at Fiat Wealth Management. In this podcast, we aim to broaden your knowledge about the financial world we live in today and make the boring and complex financial decisions fun, informative, and educational. Join us on this journey where Brad and Matt will explore different strategies on how to spend your money without guilt and have peace of mind knowing you are spending it the optimal way in retirement.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Every Day is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl, partner at Fiat Wealth Management. I'm here with my partner, Brad Gatto.
Hey, everybody.
What's new, man?
It's baseball season. It's back. It's back. We started. So my life will be at the diamond, as they say, for the next 3 months of my life.
And just to be clear, you're talking about baseball seson for your children.
Yeah. I'm way past my prime. I think I peaked around 15 from that standpoint. So, but so that's what's going on in my life as far as anything outside of Fiat. How about you?
Soccer season for us.
Yeah.
So similar. They call it the pitch. That's what a soccer field's called.
Yeah. Well, okay.
You know what the soccer jersey's called?
No.
A kit.
What?
You know what the shoes are called?
No.
Boots. Interesting, huh?
That's also what the English call the trunk of your car is your boot.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. No idea.
Well, I'm more into cars than soccer. So
you are. That's true. Well, guys, we're super excited today. We're doing something a little bit different. We both tend to read a lot. We found
you tend to read a lot. I read a medium.
I read a medium. And just to be clear, you actually read the books, though. I just listen to a lot of them.
Yeah.
Because I am on the pitch often or out walking the dog. But we found one book that we both just gravitated towards. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And
there it is right there.
Brad's shown it to all you. This is we found this is a fantastic book for anyone in general, and us specifically, as we dig into with our clients on the psychology of money. So fitting that's the title of this book. So what we'd really like to do today, there's so many good quotes in this book, but there's a handful that we wanted to pick out. This is kind of a sampler, and what we'd love to hear from you if you enjoy this. So drop us a comment if this is something that is of interest to you. We're just going to pick out 3 different quotes. We're going to kind of talk about how we see those applying to what we do and the conversations we have with clients. And if this goes well and we get some interest, we're actually going to break this book down chapter by chapter, possibly, and kind of go through this whole thing. Yeah,
kind of a little bit of a pipe dream. I love the concept of that. And I know I love it, like the idea of having kind of like a special series outside of our normal cadence of our podcast where, there's how many chapters are 15 chapters in this book or something to that effect, 17, 20,
or
just
20.
Kidding. 20. Having a separate podcast episode related to every chapter of this book. At the end of the day, Matt, this book confirmed a lot of things for me. You and I have said for years that our job is highly bent towards the psychological, towards the behavioral side of things. Because at the end of the day, the outcomes with your money are driven far less by things like rate of return and far more by how you feel about it, your behaviors, your actions, and things of that nature, and where you're going to end up in life. And so we've said that for a very long time. We feel like we do a pretty good job of incorporating that into our process. It's a reason why when we onboard a new client, we spend so much time trying to get to know them personally, kind of what makes them tick, what their fears are, where they have greed, and really how they make decisions. What Morgan has done in this book, almost to the point of embarrassment, has laid it out in a much better way than we ever have. It was like this massive bittersweet love-hate type thing reading it because I couldn't put it down. I read most of it during spring break when I was supposed to be laying in the sun and enjoying the sun. And part of me was just enamored by the things he was talking about. But the other part of me was like, gosh, dang it. Like,
why did I
he's so much, he's better at this than me. So for today, we're going to tease it a little bit. Like you said, there's 20 chapters in this book. There's a lot to take in, but we have 3 things that we're going to pull out of it as, again, kind of a teaser or a synopsis or kind of an introduction into what it is. And again, drop us some comments if you would like, email us here at the firm, do whatever. And just let us know what you think about this kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, none of us wants to get to the end of our life, whenever that is, whatever that looks like, and realize that our money decisions that we were making didn't line up with the values that we have in life. It really is that simple.
Yep.
We want to be able to look back and whatever decisions you make, whether you're the person that buys new cars all the time, or you're the person that doesn't care about your paycheck and really cares about your time spent outside of an office, whatever your values are, that the decisions you made financially aligned with those values. That's what everybody wants. And what Morgan kind of breaks down a lot in this book is the competing forces that we have that a lot of times go against that. And so with that said, let's just dive right in so that this doesn't turn into a 2-hour-long podcast, because I think I could talk about this all day. And so of the 3 kind of points we wanted to draw out of this book, the first one is this idea of getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. And with each point, what I'm going to do is just read a section from the book that kind of summarizes what we're going to talk about, and then we'll break it down just a little bit. Yeah. So in the book, Morgan writes this: if I had to summarize money success in a single word, it would be survival. As we'll see in chapter 6, 40% of companies successful enough to become publicly traded lost effectively all of their value over time. 40%.
Jeez.
The Forbes 400 list of richest Americans has, on average, roughly 20% turnover per decade for causes that don't have to do with death or transferring money to another family member. Capitalism is hard. But part of the reason this happens is because getting money and keeping money are 2 different skills. Getting money requires taking risks, being optimistic, and putting yourself out there. But keeping money requires the opposite of taking risk. It requires humility and fear that what you've made can be taken away from you just as fast. It requires frugality and an acceptance that at least some of what you've made is attributable to luck. So past success cannot be relied upon to repeat indefinitely. And he goes on and on and on, but at least gives us a little bit of an insight into this point of the idea that we delineate here at Fiat, Matt, of our specialty is teaching our clients how to spend their money. Mm-hmm. And so they're at this point of life where they already are wealthy by all accounts, and whatever everybody's definition of wealth is going to be a little bit different. But the bottom line is you probably have more wealth in your life than you ever had. Mm-hmm. Usually when we meet people or interact with their story, this idea of staying wealthy, Morgan says, is harder than getting wealthy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this beforehand. There's a statement it comes down to balancing fear and greed. Yeah. And a lot of that, when you think of it, and we have this pile of money and this is all goes back to kind of our whole process that we go through with clients that come to our firm, and taking this pile of money and turning that into a paycheck where you have peace of mind and you feel good about the way that you're spending that money. You also feel good about all the unknowns that are going to be thrown at us. And hopefully those people start to shift their mindset a bit, where it's no longer is the name of the game. We have to continue growing and growing this pile of money. It is ensuring that we're a good steward for this. Yeah. Not only for ourselves today, but for ourselves 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, or generations that come after us. That could be kids, grandkids, foundation, whatever it may be. It's shifting that mindset to become a steward of that money, as opposed to, I just need to get the highest rate of return I can every year. Right. Yeah. And I think it really comes down to, I'm a big fan of principles in any facet of life, and especially in investing. Talk about psychology, this roller coaster that we're all on, whether we're aware of it or not. If we don't stick to our principles, fear and greed will just whipsaw us and control us one direction or the other. So it is a completely different game altogether.
Yeah. And I think that on that note, when you think about fear and greed, this is just my opinion, but during your savings years, during your accumulation years, your working years, before you retire, greed is usually the bigger of the 2 emotions that drives failure for people. Yep. Whereas you get into your spending years, once you are wealthy and staying wealthy, fear is the bigger of the 2 that drives. Absolutely. And there's a healthy amount of greed and there's a healthy amount of fear. The problem is it's super easy to kind of tip into an unhealthy balance in either one of those scales. And so when you've become wealthy, the set of standards of what it means to be a good steward change. Yep. And they change dramatically. And as Morgan says in this book, is the first line that I read, if I had to summarize money success in a single word, it would be survival. And when we also have the kind of this psychological effect of whatever happened in the past and whatever I did in the past is going to continue to work into the future. Right. And one of the things that there was a podcast I listened to with Morgan as well. He was being interviewed and he was talking about kind of the godfather of investing, Benjamin Graham. Mm-hmm. Benjamin Graham is kind of the guy that Warren Buffett looked up to. Yep. And we all know Warren Buffett because he's more of our time frame. But prior to Warren Buffett, everybody would say kind of the godfather of investing, specifically value investing, is Benjamin Graham. Well, Benjamin Graham, being a value investor, will readily admit that basically all of his money was made on one investment. Like most of his philosophies and principles that most people buy into don't even necessarily work, didn't work for him. He made one really good investment. It was actually into Geico. And then that's what paid off for him. But this idea that what used to work for Benjamin Graham, even if it did work back then, working today, now 80 to 100 years later in the way that our markets work, is a mistake that a lot of people make. And so people get used to these rhythms that they have in their accumulation life. And they assume that that's what they need to keep doing in their distribution life. Now that they already are wealthy, how do you stay wealthy? Making that psychological shift is tough a lot of times.
Absolutely.
So moving on, the second one that we wanted to point out is something that Morgan in this book calls margin of safety, or maybe you could rephrase that as room for error, right? And building this into our lives and what this all looks like. And so let me just kind of read this and we'll go from here. 2 things cause us to avoid room for error. One is the idea that somebody must know what the future holds, driven by the uncomfortable feeling that comes from admitting the opposite. In other words, that people might not know what's going to happen. The second is that you're therefore doing yourself harm by not taking actions that fully exploit an accurate view of the future coming true. We'll dig into that in a second. But room for error is underappreciated and misunderstood. It's often viewed as a conservative hedge used only by those who don't want to take much risk or aren't confident in their views. But when used appropriately, it's actually quite the opposite. Room for error lets you endure a range of potential outcomes, and endurance lets you stick around long enough to let the odds of benefiting from the low probability outcome actually fall in your favor. The biggest gains occur infrequently, either because they don't happen often or because they take time to compound. So the person with enough room for error in part of their strategy, cash, to let them endure hardship in another, stocks, has an edge over the person who gets wiped out, game over, insert more coins when they're wrong.
Mm-hmm. The reason I love it is because it just overlays on our approach altogether.
Yeah.
And if you've been through our process or you're familiar with our firm, you'll hear we talk a lot about sequence of returns. We talk a lot about income stability ratio. We talk a lot about buckets. We're a big fan of buckets, which you'll hear us talk about all the time.
We are a big fan of buckets.
But it comes down to, money we're planning to spend now, money we're going to spend soon, or money we're going to spend later. And so in looking at that, our approach really is, without attaching the words to it as succinctly as Morgan has done, is just building in that margin of safety to ensure that we're taking on risk in the right areas where it makes sense to do so. And, that does come back to the principles, I believe. It also comes back to a framework of actually applying a framework and some organization to money. Yeah. So we know that, hey, we know that things are going to go like this.
Yeah.
So let's set up our plan so that we're going to be okay when we hit the patches where it's like this. Yeah. Guess what? We don't know when it's going to happen. I hate to break it to everybody, but.
Well, and that's the first point that Morgan made in what we read, at least, in that we all want plans that are precise and we all want plans that are specific. But the more precise and specific your plan gets, I mean, most people associate what we do with investments, right or wrong. That's how they associate our industries, that you're going to help me with my investments. And so I'll use that as the example, that the more they think we know about the future, the more precise we can be in the exact holdings, stocks, mutual funds, whatever it is that we can pick to get to the outcome that they want. And can't confront the uncomfortable feeling that they don't, and we also don't, and nobody knows what the future holds.
Right.
And so if we knew what the future was going to hold, we kind of say this all the time, like with Social Security is a great example, because you have flexibility on how and when you file. You have this 8-year kind of period of time where you can kind of make decisions on how you file. And everybody's trying to figure out what's the most optimal way to file for Social Security. Well, the most optimal way to file for Social Security assumes that you know what the future holds. And if you know what the future held, you could actually build the exact optimal way to file for Social Security. And the problem is we have no idea what the future holds. And so we can give some estimated guesses, but again, in building in this margin of safety, again, what Morgan's point is, people would deem, well, that you're just too conservative. And I agree with him wholeheartedly that that's not what it is at all. In fact, having that margin of safety actually allows you to take risks that you couldn't take otherwise.
Exactly.
The other example, because I'm a big example guy, is the Three Little Pigs.
Brilliant.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, he didn't get to play as long as his buddies because he had to build his house out of bricks. And so it took him a lot longer. But at the end of the day, he had margin for safety.
Love it.
So it looked like he was taking the conservative approach, but at the end of the day, he's the only one that had a house.
There you go.
And sticking around long enough to let odds play out. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing that you and I do know.
Right.
What we do know is that over time, the market wins. We don't know how that's going to happen. We don't know what sectors necessarily are going to play out. We don't know when the volatility is going to come. We don't know what recessions are going to look like exactly. Nobody would have predicted COVID. Nobody knew the housing crisis was a possibility. I mean, the largest investment banks in the world are going down. So the two most recent kind of catastrophic events that we have, nobody would have predicted the .com. I mean, looking back on that 20 years later, the idea that, these companies are going public in an era of something called the internet that nobody really knew anything about or understood.
Right.
And then it all just we don't really know any of that sort of stuff. But if we have plans for the unknowns, we can build all of that in and take the risks that we need to take.
Right.
So anything you want to add to that before we go to point number 3?
Oh, well said.
All right.
Three Little Pigs.
Three Little Pigs.
I'll top that.
I love the Three Little Pigs. Point number 3. And this is the psychological effect of we all kind of believe that we're going to be the same person tomorrow that we are today. Isn't that interesting? We all get to a point in life, and I'll read more about this, but where we just kind of assume like, I'm done. I'm done growing up. I've grown up. This is who I am. And so now I'm going to build my plan based on who I am today. And so in the book, this is called The End of History Illusion. The end of history illusion is what psychologists call the tendency for people to be keenly aware of how much they've changed in the past, but they underestimate how much their personalities, their desires, their goals are likely to change in the future. Before I go on, obviously, the decisions you make with your money, if done correctly to the point of what we talked about at the beginning of this, where you can look back at 90, 95 years old, if that's how long you live, however old, at the end of your life and say, I'm very proud of what I did with my money. It's going to be based on your money lining up with your values. Your values are going to be determined by a lot of like what your goals are, what your desires are, what your personality is. So going back, they underestimate how much their personalities, their desires, and their goals are likely to change in the future. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert once said, at every stage of our lives, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people that we're going to become. And then when we become those people, we're not always thrilled with the decisions that we've made. So young people pay good money to get tattoos removed that teenagers paid good money to get. Middle-aged people rush to divorce people who young adults rushed to marry. Older adults work hard to lose what middle-aged adults worked hard to gain, on and on. All of us, he said, are walking around with an illusion that history, our personal history, has just come to an end. That we've just recently become the people that we were always meant to be and that we will be for the rest of our lives. We tend to never learn this lesson. His research shows that people from the age of 18 to 68 absolutely underestimate how much they will change in the future. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Before I ask you your thoughts on the psychology of this, I want an example. What's an example of a decision that Matt Stahl made early in life that later, now middle-aged, I'll say, Matt Stahl regrets?
I was just told the other day that something about being a middle-aged man, and it kind of caught me off guard.
Well,
yeah, I suppose. I have a perfect example. So I grew up wanting to be an architect.
Yeah.
I've talked about this on this podcast.
Yeah.
It's a marriage of creativity and numbers. And the logical choice was to become an engineer. And it didn't take me long to realize that that was not the right path for me. But when you're going through school and you're putting all your time and energy into that and thinking about the future, you just expect that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
And if anybody can comment on this, it's myself, because there's been several evolutions on things that I'm interested in or who I am as a person. And that's one of my favorite parts of all this is just personal growth. And
of all three things that we're talking about here and there's 17 other topics in this book that we haven't even touched on. I would agree with you. I would just give you kudos on this podcast that the people that I know in my life that I'm close enough to be able to make any sort of judgment, even though that's not fair of anybody, you are definitely more keenly aware and deal with this psychological flaw that a lot of people have better than most.
I appreciate that.
And you realize that you're not going to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. And there's also that kind of like sunken fallacy cost built in there too, that like whatever it is that you did, well, I've already done it and now I'm 10 years into it or I'm 15 years into it. And so I'm sure I'm not going to turn around and start all over again. So we just kind of continue down these paths that maybe we don't identify with anymore. We're not happy with anymore, but we do it just because what else am I supposed to do? And God forbid I have to turn around and go backwards at any point in my life. But outside of admitting that this has happened to you, just kind of what are your thoughts on this and how this plays out for us as for financial advisors, specifically how this can affect people when it comes to planning?
This is one of those things where we pointed out earlier where it's like, why the heck? That's not something I talked about with anybody previously with clients. It was a lot of conversation about, we don't know what's going to happen in the future with legislation or, tax law or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's not something I really ask people to confront.
Yeah.
And so this, when it comes to changing my mind about stuff, like it's huge.
Yeah.
And just observing the people that I've worked with for 15 years and how much they've changed and evolution, it's a huge lesson.
Well, to your point, I mean, we were talking because we do talk to the families we work with all the time about this stuff. I have no idea what the market's going to do tomorrow. I don't know what Congress is going to do tomorrow. Right. I don't know if a war is going to spark tomorrow. I don't know, any of that sort of stuff. I also don't know who you're going to be tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
And neither do you.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. It's really crazy to think about. And so this idea of financial planning, kind of a farce if you're doing it in that shotgun or that rifle approach of we're going to make all these decisions to put you on this perfect path and leave going back to the last point, no margin for safety. And part of the margin of safety is those economic and societal factors, but part of the margin of safety is you're not going to be the same person.
Right. Yeah.
Which is really crazy to think about. And that's where I just kind of wrap this up. That's where I'd like to leave it is challenge all of you that are listening to this podcast to build that into your life in a meaningful way. And here's what I mean by that. You're not going to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. And it may be micro changes in your thoughts, in your relationship with people, in what you do for a living and where you live and all that kind of stuff. It could be macro changes. It could be something like faith, or whatever it is. You're not going to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. And definitely not 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So think about that, put thought into that and ask yourself how you've built your financial life around this idea that not only do I not know what's going to happen around me, but I don't know what I'm going to look like and what is your margin of safety. And that ties all the way back to the first point of how do you stay wealthy? If you've gotten wealthy, how do you stay there? Yep. A certain level of fear is appropriate, and it's what's going to drive people in a meaningful way to building in things like margin of safety, but just understanding that we need to have wiggle room in expectations, because at the end of the day, none of us, Warren Buffett or otherwise, Bill Gates or otherwise, I mean, whoever you look up to as far as financially, or maybe even whoever you look up to as, just personally, none of us know this. And I think Morgan did a wonderful job. And so of kind of capturing that in this book. Selfishly, Matt, I really, really want to go through this book in great detail. So I hope we get really positive feedback on this episode. Again, we don't really ask for your feedback very often as our Everyday is Saturday crowd. Bring it on. Let's go. We're asking for it this time. Please give us your feedback. Let us know. Call, text, email, respond underneath the YouTube video. If you're watching this on YouTube, respond in the comments. If you're finding this out in the podcast world, however you're taking this content in, we would greatly appreciate it. Any closing thoughts before I wrap us out?
No. I can't top Three Little Pigs. So still.
Everybody, this is a fun one for Matt and I. So this was a kind of a selfish podcast episode, if you will. Hopefully you got as much out of it as we did. If you want to pick this book up, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, that's the name of the book again. It's a great read, not just for, financial guys like us, but just for anybody to work through why we think the way that we do, especially as something as important as money. So as always, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And every day is Saturday. If you want to reach out to us, our website's the place to do it. In fact, we've completely rebuilt the website. Go check it out if you haven't already. www.fiatwm.com. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Make sure you get those comments in there. Please give us that feedback. We greatly appreciate it. And tell your friends, your family, your loved ones, your neighbors, your enemies. I don't care who you tell about it. Just tell them about the podcast. I'm Brad Gatto here with my partner, Matt Stahl. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management or Foundation's investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Investment advisory services offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.